Hey, folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. Joining us today is Miss Susan Raby-Dunne, here to discuss her expanding biography titled John McCrae, Beyond Flanders Fields. Susan Raby-Dunne is a Canadian author, military historian, and battlefield guide in France and Belgium. She's had many pursuits as a rancher and breeder of dressage horses, as a war healer, as a touring motorcyclist, and always as a writer. Very cool. Susan has written 8 well-reviewed books, 1 nominated for an award. Her dynamic presentations about World War I have been reviewed as riveting, passionate, and first-rate, on-the-ground historical research. She plans to explore writing more fiction. In 2011, she followed the path through France and Belgium by motorcycle of her World War I subject, in Flanders Fields poet, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. It was as close as I could get to horseback, which was how he traveled in World War I. Her small, customized European tours with Canadian war history tours tend to be cathartic, even healing for her clients, as they come to truly understand what their relatives went through in the world wars. Clients also find it particularly moving to stand at the grave of a relative who fell in one of the world wars, sometimes being the first in their family to do so. A link to Canadian war history tours will be provided in the show notes. Folks, do check it out, as there are some unique tours that Susan offers. Obviously, as a bit of a basic bro here, the Battlefields and Beer tour caught my eye right away. But she also offers Canadian-centered tours like the World War I tour, where you, quote, follow the Canadian Corps from their initiation in Fleurbe, France, to their baptism of fire in the Ypres salient, Belgium, and battles in the Somme, Vimy, and Hill 70, end quote. And the 100 Days tour, where you, quote, follow the Canadian Corps from the turning point in World War I, August 8th, 1918, Amiens, France, to the end in Mons, Belgium, and the first armistice, end quote. So, Susan joins us this afternoon from Izmir, Turkey, a first here on the podcast, which is super cool.
Turkey, yeah.
Yeah. And she's joining us to discuss her biography of John McCrae, Beyond Flanders Fields, which is, like I said, currently being expanded and will be released in late 2026 or in 2027. A description of her book. Most Canadians are familiar with John McCrae through his iconic poem, In Flanders Fields, which was penned on the battlefields of the First World War and remains a symbol of remembrance to this day. Although he will always be remembered as a war poet, the Ontario native was a physician, a university professor, and a veteran of the Second Boer War before he ever laid eyes on the carnage at Flanders Fields. Citing rarely seen diary entries and letters, as well as never before published photos of McCrae's early life, military historian and McCrae enthusiast Susan Raby-Dunne tells the complete story of John McCrae, a man whose final chapter of life made him immortal, but who accomplished so much and helped so many in the decades before. Susan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
I have to add a note.
Yes.
Nobody has signed up for the Battlefields and Beer tour yet. So I don't get it. I'm trying to get a group of people to go on that one because it would be awesome.
The appeal is right in the name, is it not? Battlefields and Beer. Like,
come on.
Food optional. Wait. I don't know, folks, but I'm pretty sure liquid lunches are involved, which sounds great. So I would be totally in. All right, Susan, you've been a historian and a battlefield tour guide for many years, and you've also worked with veterans for decades as well. What sparked your interest in history, and what began your interest in the First World War in particular?
Well, the First World War, I've always been interested in military history kind of lightly,
Okay.
but on a really miserable fall night on our farm ranch, I was surfing the internet and the our cable channels, and I came upon a National Film Board of Canada documentary called John McCrae's War.
Okay.
And so I thought, oh, this looks interesting. So I watched the whole thing, and I don't know, something about that just grabbed me. Uh, a lot of it had to do with his horse. He had kind of a special relationship with this horse and it was mentioned sort of casually in this documentary, but really the more I delved into it, the more I realized this was a very critical part of his life, especially in the war. It was almost like a connection to beauty and decency and maybe even sanity in the war.
Right.
So that was really what sucked me in initially, was Bonfire, this beautiful horse that he was given to take to war. So yeah, I just started, thought, I should, everyone learns this poem in Flanders Fields,
Right.
but I think I mentioned in my, I'm not sure, but I didn't have it memorized. I knew of it. I could say a few lines of it, but it wasn't memorized, and it was way in the back of my mind. And I thought, I should have a look at this guy who wrote this poem that, is said every year in Canada on November 11th, and in a lot of other countries too, allied countries that were allied in World War One. And the more I looked at him, the more interested I became. And one of the first, and this is a woo-woo thing. Well, it just is. I I started looking at a couple of peripheral people around him, and I thought I'd look at this guy, Major General Sir Edward Morrison.
Yes.
This is his memoir, which I got published in 2017. And nothing came up about him at that time, which is incredible when I think of it now. Nothing except a handwritten copy of In Flanders Fields. And this filled my screen all of a sudden. And I just had the strangest reaction to it. I burst into tears. I'm not a burst into tears kind of person. It was like the handwriting was familiar. It was really weird. Anyway, all I discerned at the time is, I think this is a trail I need to follow. So I started to learn as much as I could about John McCrae.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
I
amazing.
want to hear
And
about my research. Oh, go ahead.
no, I was going to say also your biography of Morrison there. I recently saw that photograph with a friend of mine, Michelle Gravel. So Morrison,
Yeah.
he was an artillery commander, and he featured in a story that my friend Michelle was telling some podcast listeners. So I'm, that's now for me, is I need to get my hands on that Morrison biography, because he's also came up as very interesting. But
Yeah, I know Michelle as well.
and McRae,
Really
we all know
character.
the poem, but I have to admit, like, I knew very little else about him, other than he died early in 1918, which seems just so damn tragic. So I really look forward to getting down and talking more about him as well. So I'm so glad you took on this. You went down this path. You
Oh,
felt the calling.
well, I can ramble on for long periods of time. So make sure you ask me the questions and interrupt me if I go on too long.
Sure thing. Sure thing. No problem. So we'll start here. So your written work focuses on Canadians and the Canadian experience in the First World War. And I had put up to and including the biography of a certain charger named Bonfire. This was McRae's horse. And so I think we've established, like, what made you want to follow Lieutenant Colonel John McRae's footsteps and write a biography of him. So we'll just move on here. We've got, like I said, we know of him as a battlefield surgeon, forever immortalized for being the author of the war poem In Flanders Fields. However, many of us, myself included, we don't know a whole lot about his personal life. So, Susan, how was John McCrae raised?
Well, he was raised in a very traditional Scottish Canadian family. His both his parents were, I think his dad was a small child when he immigrated to Canada from Scotland. I think his mom was born in Canada, but two Scottish immigrants. And if you know
Okay.
the Guelph, Ontario area, honestly, Guelph is like being in Scotland, even the look of the buildings, especially in the old parts. So
Okay.
he was raised in a very conventional Orthodox Presbyterian, or as some people call them, the Black Presbyterians, and
Interesting.
very devout. But his dad had well, both of his parents had influences in different ways, but his father, particularly as far as the military goes, his dad was a very keen gunner. He ended up being a gunner in the Fenian Wars along the border of Canada and the United States when the Irish Republicans were trying to cause trouble along the border for the British, right? So, and he took, I have an excerpt from a letter when John McCrae was 8, where he's talking about the Wellingtons in a shooting contest along the Grand River. So he was quite enamored of the guns from quite a young age. And then as he got older, he just desperately wanted to be in well, I guess the militia, and he got into these Guelph cadets when he was like 15, I think. So he was just really had that military passion all along that his father kind of engendered in him. And his dad also told him these great dramatic stories about, kind of swashbuckling British Empire exploits to do with the military and military operations and stuff. So that was his dad. Then his mother on the other side was a very artistic, sensitive. She sang. She encouraged them to read literature,
Okay.
and so that kind of balanced him in a way because he was always sketching, quite a good artist as well, but also writing poetry, essays, short stories, and so on. So it was a very close knit, um, I would say, loving family. As usual, I guess I have that Scottish Canadian background as well. Not very demonstrative people. You don't say "I love you" to your kids. You don't hug them.
Right.
So I think he was quite a deep character that was always interested in death and the afterlife, and so I think poetry was a great outlet for him to express emotions that he couldn't really do otherwise. So yeah, I think he had a really pretty healthy, well, very supportive family that encouraged education. They were really big on getting the best education possible, but also that you must be a decent person. If you see injustice, you need to fight it. They didn't like people that put on airs.
Interesting.
That would be frowned upon. And yeah, it was a really good family, I would say. And they did some farming, and they had the Guelph woolen mills, and entrepreneurial as well. So, but he got steered into the sciences, and of course, really excelled in the sciences. So he ended up. There was some talk that he might look at biology or even marine biology, but finally, a few people said nope, he needs to go into medicine. So, and his parents were extremely supportive of both him and his older brother, who became a doctor before he did, a couple of years before he did.
Oh, that's
So
excellent.
good, strong Scottish Canadian family. So
Yeah, and he seems to have been classically educated because just as you're saying, the dad was telling him about like the military exploits and everything, but he got mom's influence with arts and literature, which definitely obviously shows, I think, not only in McCrae's works, but also in just who he was as a person, and and tying that in with his religious devotion as well, like you said, like having to fight injustice when he saw it, like really. All right, I came away from reading your book with such a better understanding of him as a person, and now understanding the poem in Flanders Fields and his his other poems as well, which are just as powerful.
Yeah.
So we have a few days after McCrae's death in January 1918, his friends are trying to get McCrae's beloved horse Bonfire a new home. George Adami, a friend of McCrae's, wrote in a letter, McCrae thought more of the horse than many a man does of his wife. Can you tell us about McCrae and his love for animals? And how was he received when he was stationed in France? This is a part that really struck a chord with me.
Well, he loved animals. Actually, that was noted from when he was a child. He loved dogs, cats, horses. And there's a story about the family bulldog went through the ice into the Speed River, probably in spring, and he didn't hesitate. He went right in and pulled the dog, fished the dog out, and wrapped the dog in his coat and got him by a fire pit as soon as he could. So yeah, he always loved animals. And he there was some talk that he might lose Bonfire at one point, and the Surgeon General at the time in Canada had sort of threatened him a couple of times to say, don't get too fond of that horse because medicals are not allowed mounts. And the curious thing about McCrae, I think it might be unique, is that he was in the artillery, before he was in the Canadian Army Medical Corps. He was both major second in command and brigade surgeon. So he kind of came back at the Surgeon General and said, but I'm not in the medical corps. I'm in the artillery, and officers are allowed to have horses, right? So, by the time he got to France, and he was taken out of the artillery in the middle of a really horrific battle. It was Festubert, and then it kind of morphed into Givenchy.
Mm-hmm.
And it was awful and bloody, and it wasn't a winning battle. And then he got plucked out of there in the middle of it, which he felt really bad about. If you know any veterans, to be pulled out of battle and your comrades are there yet that may die, it's a terrible feeling of guilt.
Guilt, right.
So they got him into the Canadian Army Medical Corps, still not officially at that point, but he started out in this tent hospital, which was the first iteration of number 3 Canadian General Hospital, McGill. And he didn't have the horse with him. He said he left the horse safely with his groom, he thought.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably Surgeon General, I can't think of his name right now. Anyway, that got the horse taken. And then, he actually got probably regulations broken in a way, all kinds of strings pulled to get the horse back to him at this hospital in Camier, France, which is in the dunes, kind of it's either just south or just north of Étape, the huge big hospital cemetery. So anyway, that was just like, I don't think he would have lived as long as he did if that horse hadn't been returned to him. Somehow he just developed this really close relationship with this horse. So he got the horse back, and then because the tent hospital kind of got blown away in the storms of winter of 1915-16, they looked for a better place, and they found this partially burned out Jesuit school up the highway in Boulogne, just outside Boulogne. So that's where he ended up. But by then, actually before that, he had already displayed signs of PTSD quite clearly.
Right.
Yeah. One of his medical colleagues from Canada, Archibald, I can't remember his last name either. But anyway, Eddie Archibald, sorry. They were very close comrades. And also McCrae lived in his house in Montreal when he was teaching at McGill before the war.
His landlord, yes.
Yeah, his landlord, but really good close friend as well. He said there's no question that Jack is badly shell-shocked. And then people that saw him were just like, oh, damn it. He's aged about, Canadians, we swear a lot. It's hard to contain ourselves. But anyway, spend a day with Michelle. Anyway, kidding. So, everyone noticed, the nurses noticed, the usual jovial character that always had a story or would be singing a song as he was going about his work was just not that guy anymore. And he never really fully recovered from that. He got to where he could perform his duties adequately, and he was always really devoted to the soldiers no matter what. He would never have let them down. In fact, he got to be a bit of a martyr about that toward the end of his life, demanding to stay in a bell tent
Right.
like soldiers in the field rather than going into better quarters for a guy that was not well. So yeah, that was really the beginning of the end was the Second Battle of Ypres on the canal in April of 1915. He just never really got over that. So I've when I give my presentations about him, I say that even though he was in the South African War, that's where he met Morrison in the first place. I don't know if you know that. You probably knew that. They were lieutenants together in the South African War. He didn't really get into the heavy fighting like Morrison did. He
Mm-hmm.
got sent on these long marches, guarding railway lines, this kind of thing, right? And he got into a couple of light skirmishes, lobbing a few shells back and forth. But, he didn't, having been with a lot of combat vets, in my opinion, he didn't get what I call the cure for war.
Yes.
You either are able to rise above the violence and the impact of it to continue to be a good, balanced human soldier, or you don't. So I don't think he really knew what he was getting into. And on the canal bank there in Ypres, what he saw, just horrendous. You can't even imagine it in your worst dreams. Between the gas and the what nobody had ever seen, really, the impact of that kind of artillery. So a guy had come to you to be treated, had his whole side blown off or half of his
Right.
face. He'd never
Right.
seen that kind of thing before. So it was just a shock to a compassionate, sensitive, humanitarian person, I think.
Yes. And it wasn't just a few days, it was something like 17 days straight that they were in the line. And despite being artillery, they were, really close. They were on the canal bank there. But they're basically, almost on the front line the
Exactly.
entire time.
Like they pulled out some guns, Major King's guns, right at the beginning of the battle. They pulled them back. A guy got the Victoria Cross for, you know, fending off the Germans to the last minute and then he got killed, Fred Fisher. Once they got those guns out, McCrae's brigade remained the furthest forward of all the artillery brigades in that battle. So they were, like you say, right on the front line. And Alexis Helmer's half of his battery remained undetected and stayed in the same spot for the whole duration of the battle, right, I believe, close to McCrae's dressing station, which was a hole dug in the back of the canal bank, not
Right.
those cement bunkers that people are usually told where he was. So, yeah. And it was awful. You would have been up to your ankles in muck, probably pieces of people and blood, and didn't get to change or shave, or it would have just been horrific to be in there for 17 straight days.
Yeah. Gosh. Like awful, awful stuff. And again, you think humans would find the cure for it, but apparently we just never do. Yeah.
No.
It's part of our condition, I guess. So you touched on this actually. McCrae had a long military career well before the Great War. So yeah, so he served in the Second Boer War with the Canadian artillery. And you say he didn't get his cure. And is that just to recap, Susan? That is because again, like his friend Morrison is off doing some heavy fighting, but McCrae, like you said, a few light skirmishes, which you know, I was in the service as well, but like a skirmish to me would be a big deal, as it would, I think, to most folks.
Yeah.
But like you're saying, it's not. He didn't come away being like, okay, I've had enough war. I'm good. I've seen what it is. That
Yeah.
that
I
that
think
kind
that's
of
true.
encompasses his time.
Yeah. I mean, they suffered lots of trials, especially the weather, the germ-laden water.
Hmm.
They didn't anticipate how cold and awful it would be on the Karoo during the winter, I think. I forget. Yeah, they were there. They arrived in January, but they were there for a year. and it was freezing cold. They didn't have proper, one of his biggest beefs is that they didn't have proper feed for their horses.
Right.
And I don't know if I told this story in the little book that I sent you, the manuscript, but did I talk about where he almost, the closest he came to death in the South African War, that he almost drowned?
I'm not. No, I don't think that part was in there.
Well, he was leading a column, and they were going through a lot of swamps and all kinds of awful. And the horses were underfed and easily exhausted and just not up to snuff. And his horse fell and fell on him in the water.
Okay.
And they had to get the horse off him. And it was a real close call. He just about drowned. Like they got him plucked out of there just in time before he, could have drowned underneath the horse. So that was a very close to being a.
Yes, that is in there. That is you
Okay.
did put that in. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, so that was as close as he came to peril, really, I think. And I've got this. This is a great resource also, Morrison's book with the guns in South Africa.
Okay.
It's another memoir, and he mentions McCrae, quite a few times, but that they were separated. And then McCrae, I think he was there 3 months or more when he wrote to his mother and said, if I don't get in a scrap soon, I'm going to be really mad, And
Right.
in the end, he just really didn't see much action. So that's kind of, I think, why he was ready to go to the next one. Now he talks about, that he felt it was his duty to serve, and I'm sure there's some of that too. And I've had people ask me, why did Canadians even go to World War I and the South African War? But people need to remember that, most of them came, or at least their parents came from England, Scotland, Ireland. Well, maybe not Ireland. When I say that, they were proud members, really proud to be part of the British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like a no-brainer to go to war if the motherland was in trouble. So they just did it without hesitation. I'm pretty sure some guys went for the adventure, but I think he just went out of a sense of duty. But I think he also hoped to prove himself again in battle, which he probably didn't really feel like he got the opportunity to do in the Boer War. So that was, he had several reasons for answering Morrison's call. Morrison asked, "Come on, Jack, we need you." So, and they were buddies. So, of course, he was going to.
Yeah. Right. No, I think you're absolutely right. Like that sense of devotion, probably the sense of seeing, the Germans are wrong here. This is an injustice. It needs to be fought, and it's being fought against us. Am I correct that Canada was still a part of the British Empire at that time?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Canada was very much part of the British Empire.
Okay. So. And I'd like to go back to McCrae and the toll that the war starts to take on him. What were some of the signs? Like you said, like he was normally pretty cheery, but I did read that like people were like, what was it? Something that stuck with me was that you said like, oh man, if you didn't address him by his rank,
Oh yeah,
he would snap at you, which was
yeah,
rather unlike him.
yeah. That was really unlike him. That was toward the end in the hospital in Boulogne. People might call him Dr. McCrae, and if you did that, he never wanted it forgotten that he was a military man, and I really think that was his first passion. Full stop. But the other thing is that he just became very irritable, like things that used to roll off him, or he might even make a joke about, he would snap at people. And, and everyone gave him a lot of leeway because they remembered what a lovely man he'd been before that. And they knew that he just wasn't himself. So I think they gave him a lot of leeway because you don't hear people, I've looked at some nurses' memoirs and so on. So on, like for instance, Claire Gass. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was one of the first people that hand wrote out in Flanders Fields in her memoir. Anyway, they just saw the change in him, and they were quite forgiving of him and probably felt quite compassionate toward him. Yeah.
Gosh. he was like you said, a pretty untirable man. Like he was very devoted to serving the soldiers, and like you said, he lived in that bell tent when he could have had better quarters as an officer in the CAMC.
Yeah.
And so his, probably all of that led to I would guess a weakening of him physically, so that he suddenly came down with pneumonia, and his death was a very sudden thing. And how was his death felt in the Canadian military community?
I should add that he had asthma and that
Okay.
he was gassed many times, several times. I was just trying to find there's a map of the hospital grounds that a really great draftsman soldier drew. Can't find it. Anyway, there's all the buildings and stuff are numbered, and I think it's number 16 beside the pathology lab, which was just a little wooden hut. There's a little lone tent there, and that's where he was staying. And sorry, what was your question?
No problem. I actually I think I went on like way too long.
Oh, sorry.
Basically,
I could go off on tangents all over the place, but anyway.
well,
Uh,
you've come to the right place, Susan.
okay.
So basically, McCrae's death was
Oh, how, yeah.
was a
How's it
pretty
felt?
sudden thing. But how was it felt in the Canadian military community?
Well, he had probably if not the biggest, one of the biggest funerals in all of World War One, period. British, doesn't matter, Kiwis, Aussies. And, there was like almost 100 nursing sisters, but all these dignitaries came also, like British lords and sirs and, all senior officers in the
Hmm.
British Army. And, the fact that General Currie and Morrison came from the theater of battle to be at his funeral is pretty significant. So, yeah, I think, and then I think I've got that line in the book that you may have read where his colleague, so he was, there was the head of the hospital and then the head of surgery and the head of medicine. That was McCrae. The other guy that was the chief of surgery, he wrote a letter back to the head who'd had to go home with illness, describing, really giving a blow by blow of McCrae's last hours on the earth. And it's very moving. And finally he says, we can't believe even yet that we shall never see him again.
Yeah.
And it's so touching. So everyone was taken aback. He got the flu, which was no big deal, but he went really downhill, and then he kind of rallied a bit. So people got quite encouraged, and then he just plummeted, and they took him down the road from number 3 Canadian General to number 14 British Officers Hospital. They just were trying anything they could think of. Maybe one of the surgeons or physicians there might have an idea how to help him. But really, even by the time they sent him down the road, his pulse went down to almost, you couldn't even hear it. And he wasn't, I think he only lasted another few hours after he got there. So that's why some people have said, why did he have a Union Jack on his casket? Well, that's because he was at that British hospital. So that's why.
Oh, okay.
But, a lot of people were devastated by him. And Morrison says in his memoir that the soldiers learned in Flanders Fields with their hearts. Oh, and he also says it was written in the peak of the blood and fire of Canada's sort of trial by fire. So everyone knew that. That's the thing about that poem that makes it so special is that, when I give my presentations, I say that it's clearly McCrae gets it, as veterans say. Do you get it? He gets it because he wasn't sitting somewhere safe when he wrote it. He was right in the thick of this battle when he wrote it, and as mentioned earlier, it was a way to decompress and get his feelings out in a sort of acceptable manner. So that poem just poured out of him, and part of it was, of course, too, that one of the popular guys in the brigade, he was talking to a guy from another brigade, Second Brigade. They both got hit with the same shell. And that's not usually mentioned, that the other guy, Lieutenant Owen Haig, he was invalided down to Hazebrouck, which is just over the line. It's French Flanders area.
Hmm.
And he only lasted a few hours after that. But Helmer was obliterated, like in pieces, literally. And
Yeah.
I there's still a bit of mystery as to where his actual bunker was. And I'm leaning towards it being right near the bend in the canal where that half of Helmer's battery was hidden for the whole duration of the battle.
Okay.
And that's known because one of the other colonels in that brigade, Dodds, is the guy that stated that years after the war that half of Helmer's battery was hidden in a spot that the Germans never found. So I think that McCrae, if he didn't see it happen, he might have come on it like pretty soon after it happened, and that would have just been horrific. You can't even, you've heard lots of stories of someone's talking to their best mate, and then next thing he's got no head. It was like that.
Right. Right.
Just the shock of that, especially someone you knew and loved, right? You can't even imagine how that would affect you.
Right.
So that was the thing that really triggered him to write that poem, and the deep, deep wish that it wouldn't be in vain, that they
Right.
would win. So as warriors do, they want to win. So
Right. And he has a follow-on poem that you have in your book. Is it the anxious dead?
yeah,
And I thought that one a very moving one as well. Like, and it's almost I felt that you need to read In Flanders Fields and then The Anxious Dead as in tandem. Like
you're
one.
exactly right, because that The Anxious Dead is the very last poem he wrote just before he died. And I really think it shows his despondency, but also his fear that, you know, these soldiers died not knowing how the day had gone. That's a line in there. And he just couldn't accept the idea that these guys might die in vain and that he might die also without knowing the outcome, which he did. He did die
Right.
before the out. In fact, when he died, Germany was getting to launch their last crack at really making a difference, Operation Michael, and it wasn't looking very good for the Allies at that point.
Right.
I think that he was just so worried that the whole thing might collapse and all the deaths of his friends and his mates might be in vain. So I should say, if you ever want to cruise YouTube, find The Anxious Dead with Words.
Ooh.
Because
Okay.
I've written some music to both In Flanders Fields and The Anxious Dead. And
Okay.
um, there's a choir sings The Anxious Dead. And,
Really?
and the visuals were put together by a woman who was at the launch of the Bonfire book. She just strung together as many images quickly as she could. I think she put this thing together in like the next day after the launch of Bonfire. So it was done on a moment's notice, but that's The Anxious Dead being sung by a male choir. And it's quite powerful. Like it kind of gives you the goosebumps.
Oh,
So
that's amazing. I'm going to try to. I will look it up and I'll get it into the episode notes for when the
oh, great.
podcast goes out.
Yeah. I
Um,
hadn't looked for it for probably a couple of years, and somebody mentioned it to me. So I wonder if it's still on YouTube. So if you just search The Anxious Dead with Words,
with words. Okay.
should come up.
All
I
right.
also wrote a military musical version of In Flanders Fields, which I got produced to be a fundraiser for the Poppy Fund, and it debuted internationally back in 2006 before any of my books were even out. So that's pretty good, I think.
No, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. It's amazing. I guess like our final point here is the poem In Flanders Fields. Now you said by the time of McRae's funeral, like Canadian soldiers had learned it with their hearts, and it was so. McRae writes it during the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915, or thereabouts, and then he passes away in January 1918, about two and a half years later. And how how well known was In Flanders Fields by that time?
I don't know that it was really widely known. I would say it was certainly known in the artillery and with a lot of soldiers,
Okay.
Canadians especially, but I think it was starting to spread out beyond that. And then it was published in Punch magazine in December of 1915 without the author's name. And I think pretty soon, it became known that he was the author of it. So, but it was very popular in Punch magazine. And I would say an issue of that magazine now would be worth a lot. I would really like to get my hands on one with that original publication of the poem. Then I think it was after the war that this American from Georgia, sorry, I've been in the country of Georgia, which they pronounce Georgia. She, and also there was a French woman too, that she was a correspondent with. Between the two of them, they came up with an idea of World War I veterans creating poppies and selling them for their rehabilitation. So with that, the poem just went everywhere after that. Like, for instance, when I was doing my research, I found a really nice tribute to McCrae and the poem on the Arlington Cemetery website. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Oh,
Yeah.
amazing.
So
Amazing.
yeah, and now, well, why do you think the Americans stopped wearing the poppy? They did wear the poppy, like, for instance, did you ever see that series Boardwalk Empire?
Yes, love it.
So there was a funeral of a World War I veteran, and they all had poppies on the boardwalk in New Jersey. I think that's where that's supposed to be.
Yes.
So yeah, that I was most impressed with the quality of the research on that American series that they had that in there. I thought that was really amazing. So yeah, I guess it was. She continued right into World War II, and Moyna Michael was her name, and I think she
hmm
raised something like $4 million. And then it just kind of faded out of favor. I don't know why, but it's just kind of curious that.
Yes, I have to say I don't know the exact reason, but yes, the poppy has never quite taken on the significance it has in Canada and Britain here in
Mhm.
the US. But I will say, just a few years ago, outside of my local grocery store, coming
Yeah.
up on Memorial Day for us in late May, members of the American Legion were out there, and they were selling these little cloth poppies,
Oh,
for a
sweet.
dollar for like a donation. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, they're, red poppies. I know why, and
Maybe it'll come back. Who knows?
yeah, probably I would guess the centenary of the war has probably reawakened some of that here in the U.S. The significance of the poppy, as it was post-war. Uh,
Right.
so yeah. Oh, and amazing. Now you are working on expanding your biography of
Yeah.
McRae, and so
This this little book.
yes.
So I got the rights to it back, and I sent the manuscript to this company in this publisher in Britain, and they loved it. But they said we want it to be twice that size. So would you be willing to do that? So I have a contract now to have a first draft by August. I'm not ready, but I'm getting there. It's going pretty well. Yeah.
Oh, awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Good luck, and I've made note that the book is being expanded, but that used copies can still be found on eBay and various places online.
Yeah.
And oh my
And
gosh,
you know what? I read it. I read all these books again because when you start research on a new project or a new subject, you have no idea what you're looking at. You don't know the context of things. So I reread a whole bunch of the stuff I'd read to begin with, and for research purposes like that with the guns in South Africa. And I read this book again, or maybe for the first time, because you don't really read it when you're writing it. I
hmm
thought, "Yeah, this is really good." It's a good book.
yeah,
So
no, it was very very enjoyable.
that's the one
Oh,
that was nominated for an award. But I should say that this little book here is the very first kind of memoir, or I should say biography of McCrae written. And
okay,
I was given, actually, no, I read a PDF of this online when I first started researching him, and, didn't know what I was looking at. It was one of the first things I read. And then a friend of mine, uh, in Ontario gave me a gift of this book, which is the real thing. So what makes this special is that it was published in 1919, so it's very fresh.
Incredible.
And the guy that wrote it was not only a colleague of McCrae's from McGill University, but he was also a major who ran the 6th Field Ambulance out of Loker, Belgium. So he really was, tapped into World War I. And so it was in reading this book, years after I first read it, reading it again, that I think I solved the mystery of what happened to Bonfire. Because there's a little tiny sentence in there where he says, Bonfire's location, something like, is secret, needs not be known by he's safely retired, the brass need not know. And so that's all he says. And then the other thing that made me think that was probably the case is that both General Currie and Morrison brought their own horses back from the war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you had to have rank to do that and pull. But the fact that they did that with their own horses, I thought there's no way they would have let Bonfire go into a remount depot or maybe get consigned to hauling guns or something like that. They would never have allowed that. And to me, when I give my presentations, I always say, pardon the expression, but to me, the ass backwards proof of that is that none of those guys ever uttered a word about it.
Yep.
To me, that's all you need to know.
Code
It
of
was
silence.
very much against regulations, right?
Yep.
So
yep.
Yeah,
That's a heartening end to the story here. That at least Bonfire was
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
You know,
I think so. I believe so.
Amazing.
Go ahead.
No, Susan, I just wanted to say, and just so listeners would know, folks, as Susan said at the begining of our recording here, no one has yet signed up for the Battlefield and Years tour. But folks, you really need to get on that because, Susan, you are just such an interesting person. So I think our email chain when it began back in, I think it was December. I think it began. You were in Malaysia.
Oh yeah, my son lives there, so I was there for Christmas.
Incredible. And then when we touched touch base again, okay, we're going to set a date here for today's talk and everything, and you were saying like, okay, I'm going to be in Greece, but then by that time I'll be in Izmir, Turkey. So like, and I've been here in the U.S. the whole time. So what a path all of these electrons have taken so that we can be here.
Well,
right.
I saw
now.
your podcast. I watched your whole podcast with Michelle. And I thought, it seems so relaxing the way you do it. You're just kind of sitting down having a chat. So I thought, or I'm not sure if I thought of it or somebody I know in Ontario suggested, you should be on that. You should go on that show. So I thought I'd contact you and see what you thought about that. So,
oh my God, absolutely.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for coming on. This has been.
But I wanted to make a point about the horses.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing about Bonfire being put in a safe place. When they were on Salisbury Plain, the horses were dying of hoof rot because they were out in the elements and they weren't given proper shelter. So those guys pooled their money and rented a farm. So that just shows you how highly they valued the horses and how careful they were with how they were treated. So to me, you think back on that and you think, yeah, they would never have let Bonfire go into a remount depot, go to who knows who, and someone who might abuse him or whatever.
Right. No, and also earlier when you were talking about McCrae in South Africa, and how the horses didn't have proper feed and everything,
No.
it reminded me of stories from the U.S. Civil War where cavalry soldiers then, like, their job was, the horse eats first and then me, and
Right.
sometimes the horse would eat and the men would not.
Or gets water.
Yes.
Very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. All right, folks, the book is John McCrae, Beyond Flanders Fields. Used copies are available out there.
This is what it looks like if you see it,
Yes.
online. It's a little turquoise book.
All right. And stay tuned for the new and expanded version to be released later this year. I'm not saying that to pressure you, Susan. I'm just saying that to send good vibes that you have it done by August. but I totally understand.
I'm grinding through his early life and his university years right now, which is, in this book, I pretty much just lightly sketched that and jumped straight into his first war, which was the Boer War. But now I'm having to flesh out his, and you know what, it's interesting to me to pay attention to those details. And, for instance, how they were educated in those days. He, at the Guelph Collegiate College, they learned Greek, they learned Hebrew, they learned Latin.
Incredible.
They were just so far ahead of school now, which is just pathetic compared to their curriculum. So, it's interesting to pay attention to that.
Oh, very good. Very good. Susan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and look forward to speaking with you again.
Oh, sure. Thank you very much for having me. That's been fun.